There were very strong feelings, one side or the other. Not directly getting into that today. One observation seems to me that the Jewish community, or I might say the Orthodox Jewish community from the Torah world, is engaged in this election much, much more than any election, for sure in the recent past that I can remember, but I think in a very, very long time. You have the frum world very, very engaged in this election. And I think that's first and foremost because people understand there's a lot riding on the winner of this election. The country looks like it's potentially going on two distinct paths, and figuring out who wins al pi derech hateva, based on practical means, will determine the path of the country, not just for the next 4 years, but perhaps for decades, maybe a generation to come. It's such a pivotal point that our country is in. So much so, also as a pretty unprecedented point, is tomorrow, Monday, which in general, Tefillah on a Monday is one of the Yemei Rachamim. Tomorrow happens also to be the last day of the Tefillah of Bahab. But the Gedolim have called for a Yom Tefillah, for people to gather together in Shul to say extra Tehillim, suggested other Tefillos. And it's for sure happens to be the day before the election. But it's something Klal Yisrael needs Yeshuos, needs Refuos, and we very much believe that our tefillos, our hishtadlos in the spiritual realm is ultimately what's going to make a difference. I saw an article quoting Rav Moshe Feinstein that Rav Moshe said, in general, in the political process, of course, all the Gedolim always encouraged the From Torah world to vote. Because in a democracy, if you don't vote, you're not represented. And it's very important for the From community, the Torah community, to show that we're part of the process, we're involved, we're engaged. At the same time, Rav Moshe said, our votes matter for all representatives. But when it comes to the king, Chazal say, when it comes to the president, Chazal say, Yad Melachim is biyad Hashem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the one directly who crowns, who anoints, who chooses kings. And it seems, Rav Moshe says, there's a special hashgacha, there's a special divine force. HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, Kiviyachol, is the one pulling all the strings on who's going to be president. So that does give us a certain bitachon to sit back. Everyone's very nervous. Look, obviously, people are going to do their part to vote for whoever they feel is fit to be the next president. But to realize that the victor is biyad Hashem, I guess whenever that victor is named, the victor is biyad Hashem, and it's something which obviously we do our ishtabas, but all the more so in this type of situation, it's Hashem direct intervention choosing it. So that does give us a little bit to fall back on and to relax. You also see people involved very much so in outright displays of supporting candidates. There are what they call trains of cars, these rallies, which are clearly being involved with from people. You have banners and flags everywhere. And that's also a certain level of involvement which you have not seen from the frum world in the past. So a big showing of overt presence, perhaps on one side more than the other. And that too is not so pashut. Not clear that, of course, a person might want to show support, there might be issues of Akaris HaTov involved, but we have to be very cognizant of the image that we display to the world, and perhaps sometimes these things are done a little bit overboard. I dare say sometimes these things are not really vetted and asked of Gedolim. Is this the right thing to do? Should we be so overt? Should we be so out there? Should we turn Borough Park into Rosh Chodesh Adar? Purim flags all around the neighborhood? Like, you have to know what the right thing to do. In general, questions of voting is always an area which is, of course, a person has a personal vote, and look, in life people have bechira, we say about everything. Kol shekain, the person has bechira about who to vote for. But at the same time, Das Torah is something which I think is critical in a person's choice of who to vote for. Because at the end of the day, the person you're voting for is not just serving you, he's serving your community. And if you vote for somebody who you have your personal reason why you don't like this candidate, you like that candidate, but for the Jewish community, it's a worse choice. For the Torah world, it's a worse choice. You have to be very careful. You know, our vote might be a personal vote, but it's a personal vote that affects so many people. And for sure, an area like so many others that we turn to Rabbanim and Das Torah for help and help us in making a decision. But today's topic, I think, is really the next level. It's beyond voting. I wouldn't be surprised after all these Jewish people are involved, engaged in politics. Many times the next step is people want to get involved in politics. They want to run for political office. And we all know there are some people who should not be running for political office. And, you know, not everybody who gets up on a soapbox, you know, on 13th Avenue deserves to run for office. But a person who runs for political office, and Baruch Hashem, the Jewish community has had over the past few decades many very dedicated servants, public servants, who dedicated their lives to helping other people to be involved in politics. And I remember ever since I was a kid, the idea of having a frum yarmulke wearing representative in government was something that I was used to. I remember I spoke a few months ago after reflecting back on people who were nifter over COVID. One of them is the Honorable, he was a judge, Noach Deer, who before that was an elected official in New York. I believe, could be I was wrong, but I believe he was the first yarmulke wearing from politician who was elected. Maybe Dov Heiken got it before him, I'm not sure. I think Noach Deer was in before, he was the first. And since then, they're all across America, from New York to Chicago, the Midwest, many Jewish communities do have, on different levels, representatives who are Jewish. And today's share, I'd like to talk about potential halachic hurdles, if you are a firm person and you're working in government, you have a position in government, we know there are obviously issues that come up which are contrary to the Torah. Now, obviously, anyone who takes a position in American government understands that they're working for American government. They're not working just for the Jews in Sanhedrin. No shaykhs. But there are some topics which are universal. The Goyim, we understand that Gentiles have Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, and inclusive in that are ideas about the value of life, abortion issues, what the sanctity of marriage is. Just in last week's Parsha, Parshas Noach, the entire generation, the Dor HaMabul, was wiped out for violating the sanctity of marriage. And I saw Mepharshim ask, how does Hashem wipe out a generation? Where's the mitzvah? Where's the clear commandment? Mepharshim explained that ideas of normalcy in marriage should be so obvious and so blatant that the Dor HaMabul is expected to understand that. You might have lost something today if the Pope doesn't grant that. But it's something that's expected. Religious people have to be the last line of defense in defending such things. And we'll talk about cases like that. There's a famous case just about 5-6 years ago. Miss Kim Davis, who was a clerk in the state of Kentucky, when the state allowed for civil unions between the same gender, she refused to sign the marriage license. And it caused a whole uproar. And here, she was a religious Christian, but she understood this went against her religion. At least she understood it back then, pre the Pope's recent declaration. Remarks. Someone told me that the Pope wasn't speaking on behalf of the religion. That was his private comments, but I don't know what that means. The Maisa, it was a major, major battle. But here is a woman who took a position to stand up for religion, even if it meant losing her job, because she felt she can't have her signature, whether she herself signs it or someone under her signs it, it's all under her jurisdiction. And how could she sign, how could her name be on a marriage certificate on something that she religiously does not believe in? So, how far is that something expected of a Jew in politics? That they have to take a position in such areas, even to the extent of losing their job? Does it make a difference what level politician you are? You could work in the city council. You could work in an assembly. You could work in the House of Representatives. You work as a senator. You work as a mayor, governor. Is there a nafkamina? Is there a halachic difference what level you are in government in terms of these things? Now we're talking all about elected official positions. We know there are many Jews. The president has a son-in-law. I'm sure when Jared goes to shul, he talks all about his share. Right? Everyone, there's so many Jews involved in politics. That's an appointed position. That's an elected position. Not necessarily his name is on things. But there are a lot of Jews. What's this guy, Avi Berkowitz? Jared's assistant. Some young schnook guy, straight out of the 5 towns. Went to yeshiva. Who would have thought, with how many hours, how much money, all the think tanks of the world trying to figure out how to make peace in the Middle East. After decades and decades, You know, this is the kid, Avi Berkowitz, who went to yeshiva. Him and Jared Kushner were figuring out, how to make, peace with all these Arab nations. It's amazing. Anyway, so today's shir, we're going to talk about the permissibility and the halachic hurdles of a Jew in politics. So I believe in discussing this issue, there really are three issues. One of them I'm going to deal extensively on today. The other two I'm just mentioning in passing because those issues are ones that I think are relatively easy to potentially get around. There's one issue that you have in many cases where you're doing something and potentially could affect other people is the Isser of Lifnei Iver. Torah's Isser of Lifnei Iver doesn't just mean Lifnei Iver L'Sitei Mechshol. There's an Isser D'Oraisa to put a stumbling block in front of your friend. That does not just mean a physical bar, Rishus Harabim, to put a stumbling block, but it's also inclusive of bad advice, of setting a person up for a situation where you can do an Avera. Now, the halacha of Lifnei Iver really deserves its own share. Probably should give a share about it sometime. But one basic getter is the only time it's usher, for the most part, is when, without you helping them, they wouldn't do the Avera. They need your assistance. They need you to set up and help them do the Avera. But in the case of where they would do it anyway, so then it's not usher. Simply look at the case of Miss Davis in Kentucky. You don't need her to get your marriage license. She's technically going to go somewhere else. Okay, she's not going to sign it. They'll go to a different district, go to a different state. Not so simple that that she is needed there, and that would be Lifnei Iver. Additionally, even in cases where there's no Lifnei Iver, there's a lower level. There's a din called Misayeh al Dvar Avera. The one's not allowed to assist somebody in doing an Avera. So one might say, even where you're not directly helping them like Lifnei Iver, but any type of assistance, that potentially is usher. However, there too, Moshe has a tshuva that it would not apply in a case of where, let's say the person is what you call a mummer. The person is known that he's going to do the Avera. So someone who's known who's going to do the Avera, you're just happen to be the one signing the document, that wouldn't be Misayeh Dvar Avera. Misayeh means you really have to assist them in some way. I mean, not directly like Lifnei Iver, but some assistance. But they're going to do it anyway. They're mummer. They're looking to be over that Avera. So then, again, you also would not be usher. So those two areas, in terms of politics, many times political positions, what I'm doing, that's Lifnei Iver. What I'm doing is Misayeh. Not necessarily are those Yisur in play. But there is a third Isser, which I believe is probably not as well known, which does play a role in these areas. And that's the Isser of Chanifa, flattery. Where's the Isser of Chanifa? So first, on your sheets you have the Gemara Mem Aleph Mem Beis. I'm going to first read the Mishnah on Mem Aleph Mem Aleph in Sota, which it's based on. The Mishnah talks about the mitzvah of Hakel, that once a cycle, 7+ years, the Kohen would gather everyone together, Yom Tov of Sukkot, and the Kohen Gadol, the Melech, would read the entire Mishnah Torah. So the Mishnah gives a whole order of how they passed around the Sefer Torah, gave it to Rosh Knesset, gave it to the Sagan gave it to the Kohen Gadol gave it to the Melech. V'amelech omer mekabel v'korei. Yoshev Agrifas HaMelech Amad v'kibo v'kara. Agrifas HaMelech got up, was mekabel the Torah and read it. Omed, the fact that he was standing, v'shavchu chachamim. The chachamim praised Agrifas HaMelech for standing, for cover the Torah. And Agrifas went and read Mishnah Torah for Hakel. Ukshiagia lo sucha lo lasis alecha ish nachri. When Agrifas HaMelech, who was the son of a Jewish woman but a Gentile father, when he got to the pasuk, you should not put a foreign person as king. Zolgul ein of demos. He started crying uncontrollably, seemingly feeling bad that here he is, the Melech Yisrael, Agrifas Melech Yisrael, when he didn't have a Jewish father. And Rashi says in Amud Beis that that's Zila B'Milsa. It's an embarrassment to Judaism, even though halachically he's a Jew, else his mother. The fact that his father wasn't Jewish, it's an embarrassment. So Amru Lo, so the Chachamim said, Al Tisyari Agrifas. Agrifas, don't worry. Achenu ata, you're our brother, you're our brothers. And it seems that appeased him. That's what the Gemara says. That's what the Mishnah says about this case. If you look on your sheets, the Gemara says on Sota Memalav Beis, Tana Mishmei Rabbi Nassan, but also Shah, at that moment when the Chachamim praised Agrifas, Nischayvu Soni Yisrael Kliya. The Jewish nation, Soni Yisrael is a euphemism, it's referring to Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael was chayiv to be annihilated. Shechnifu lo Agrifas. That they were violating the Isser of Chanifa, flattery to Agrifas. We'll see in a moment what constitutes flattery. Amr Shimon ben Chalafta, Miyom Shagava Agrufa Shel Chanifa. From the day that the Jews flattered Agrifas, Avu Hadayanim, the judgments were messed up, Niskalko HaMaisim, and actions were also destroyed. And no one was able to say, my actions are better than yours. Rashi says over there, that the judges themselves would flatter the litigants in the cases. Niskalka Maisim Shegdom Ro over Avera of Lomicha B'Yadam Nechanifa, that people, great people, saw people doing Averas and they held back from rebuking them because of these feelings of Chanifa, of flattery, which became prevalent in the Jewish nation. From the fact that the Gedolim didn't protest when people were doing things wrong. From the fact that people never protested anymore when someone was doing something wrong, then it became second nature and was taught that wrong is right. And you had generations of Jewish people doing the wrong thing. That's what the Gemara says. So you see from the Gemara, firstly, how bad an Avera Chanifa is. The fact that Chachamim did this to Agrifas, that was L'chayiv and Shemayim, destruction to the whole generation. And practically, you see what happened that once they got involved in Hanifa, it just spread like wildfire. And eventually, people stopped rebuking other people, and people learned that the wrong thing to do was okay. And Klal Yisrael fell madrega after madrega. That's part of the danger of Hanifa. If you look for a moment in Rabbeinu Yonah, in Shar Gimel, where Rabbeinu Yonah shouldn't just be viewed as a Musar Sefer Shari Tshuva. Shari Tshuva, especially Shar Gimel, Rabbeinu Yonah, who's a Rishon, goes through many mitzvahs in the Torah, the mitzvahs and Averos, and qualifies them, quantifies them. In fact, the Chavetz Chaim in his Sefer Chavetz Chaim, which talks about the halachas of Shmiras Halashon, he bases many halachas on Rabbeinu Yonah Shari Tshuva. So a Musar Sefer is not necessarily just, ethical, moral behavior, it's halacha. So Rabbeinu Yonah talks about the concept of Hanifa. You have it in the middle of your sheets. He writes, Zeh Dvar Kas Achanifim, he'll speak about flattery. In that Kas Zel Nechel Tisha Chalakim, there are really 9 different parts of flattery. We're just going to focus on the first one he talks about. Chelak Rishon, Achanif Asher Hikar Ora, someone who flatters, who recognizes or sees, or Yada Ki Yishavu B'Kav Chavera. You see someone did something wrong. Okay, he gives some examples, speaks Lashon Hara, he verbally attacks people. And he says, Lo Ba'al Davon. You say to the guy, you did nothing wrong. You screamed at that guy publicly in the middle of shul, he didn't do anything wrong. It's one thing you didn't give the person tochacha. When you see someone doing something wrong, you didn't fulfill the Torah's commandment of you didn't give the person quiet, honest, sense with sensitivity. Well, the guy quietly tell him, I think what you did wasn't right. Not only did he not fulfill that mitzvah of tochacha, the Yosef l'choti al omro lo chatasa. You added to his chait by telling him you did nothing wrong. Flattery is when you're standing up for something that's wrong and supporting it. Not only do you not fight against it, you support it. And he writes, after he quotes the pasuk of Chizkiah Yidei Mereim and Yirmiyah, V'nei zebi yarachone fa'avil, avon plili. It's a tremendous avera, someone who flatters. Well, ikana la'emes, you're not jealous for the truth. Avol yazer achar hasheker, you go after falsehood. V'yomol hara tov, and you say bad is good. V'yasam choshech la'ar, and you put darkness over light. Also hurting the person who sinned, because he's not going to feel bad, and he's going to do it again and again. This is the definition of flattery. Flattery is not rebuking the person for doing something wrong, but instead, you're supporting him. You're telling him, good gesagt. You're saying good. It's not true. In the political world, flattery happens all the time. People have positions. Yeah, I stand up for that position. Do you? If you support a bill, if you support a position which morally is the wrong position, that's Hanifa. That's flattery. It's Isser Doraisa. And thus, the Isser of Hanifa comes up right and left in the realm of politics. So many times politicians are very nervous of issues which are popular or more than popular. Sometimes there's certain things that are in vogue. come on, you have to be politically correct. What does it mean to be politically correct? You have to take certain positions which are in position. In many communities, the right to life is not an imposition. To be against civil unions of the same gender is not a politically correct position. But to support those politically correct positions would also be an Isser Khalifa. And that's not something that's so easy to wiggle out of. Not so easy. So what does one do if one's in a situation, I'm a politician, and okay, well, am I going to vote on this bill? Comes up. We're going to vote all the time. These are, look at the election. These are still hot button issues. People that are into the right to choose are very nervous with the new Supreme Court. Maybe they'll overturn earlier decisions, the right to choose. People are very, very nervous. And there constantly are different laws being written up to protect one side over the other. And a Jewish person especially, Jewish people are taking positions in which states. This election itself really points to, and it's not even the election, it's really the different policies that have been going on in the country, right now. With COVID. Jewish communities, by and large, are living in democratic states. New York, New Jersey, are very strong democratic states. Los Angeles has a big Jewish community. California is democratic. Florida, okay, we're a little, perhaps a swing vote. Illinois, not simple. So if that's where the Jewish politicians are involved, you're talking about states that are democratic, especially if the Democratic Party is becoming more and more liberal by the day. It's all the more so, these cases are coming up more and more. And to vote on something which is against your conscience, but more than your conscience, halacha, something which is applicable not just to a frum Jew, but society as a whole, like these issues are, it's not so simple how to deal with. And like they say, certain professions, what's a nice Jewish boy doing it? It's a very, very major shayla. Before anyone wants to enter the realm of politics, I think it's something that requires a nice sit-down conversation with one's Rav to really go through the situation. Is this something I'm up for? Because it takes a lot of strength to stand up for positions and to fight for them. And everybody is a Kim Davis that's ready to put everything on the line to do it. It's so simple. Now, so far we just brought up the issue, okay, so we see there is an Isser of Hanifa, which seemingly would apply very much so in politics. But how far does a person have to go? Let's say if I vote against this law, I'll vote against this pro-abortion law, then that could be the end of my career. All my years in politics, that'll be the end of it. And you can have all the more headers, how much money I brought into the Jewish community, how many from people I fought for Shmir Shabbos and all different things. So there's a lot at stake. Do I have to vote against something? How far do I have to go for it? So in the Gemara we just quoted, the Gemara in Sota, there's a Tosas at the bottom of the page. Tosas does write, when the Gemara quotes later, it's a very bad Avera, So Tosfos writes, Yesh Lefarish Lo B'Makom Sakana. We're talking in a case of where you do Hanifa where there wasn't a sakana involved. Ava B'Makom Sakana, but in a place where there'll be a sakana, Mutar. Tosfos writes it's 100% mutar to be mechanef. If there's a sakana, if your life is on the line, 100% the person is allowed to be over the isser of flattery. Tosfos brings a raya in Marnandar. That's Tosfos' position. I found also there's a Sefer Yereim who also passes like this, that the isser of chanifa is excused in a case of sakana. Now, what exactly is the halacha? Okay, that's if your life is on the line. The mafia is going to kill you. You know, if you take this position. Okay, my life is on the line. I'm going to have to vote. You know, many times politics gets involved with, politicians could be right in the crosshairs of the wrong people sometimes. So there could be situations, Malcolm Sakana. Just on Shabbos, we were sitting around the Shabbos table, so we were talking about not directly politics. I guess some people call kashrus politics, but telling the famous story of the Ridvaz that he tried to change the kashrus industry back in the day in Chicago, and he ran into problems with the mafia, and he decided to check on a kosher store on Shabbos when they didn't expect him to come. And they found him in there, and the mafia beat him, locked him to die in frigid cold freezer, refrigerator, whatever. And he was banging and banging. He almost died, and some janitor came last minute, his last breath, mamash hadais, and discovered him, and he got out on Shabbos. He got on a train and left Chicago. And Motzei Shabbos sent a telegram to his family to do the same. Mafia was after him. He was busting their fraudulent kosher meat ring. You can have cases, you mess with the wrong people, it's a makom sakana. So Hanifa would be allowed the makom sakana. And losing a job financially, I'm not sure where that falls in there. Some of that's obviously a level below sakana. Look at Rabbeinu Yonah. Rabbeinu Yonah takes a different position. Same Rabbeinu Yonah we read in Kuf Pei Ches, the second column. Look what Rabbeinu Yonah writes. Chayiv ha'adam limser atzmo l'sakana. Person is obligated to put his life up to sakana. You shouldn't do this horrible avera of flattery, of chanifa. Amur Rabbeinu Chazal taught us, quotes our Gemara here in Sota, Halina Grifish Lekara B'Torah, Shil Pasal Suchal Asil Lach Kishnachri, Zamul Timo, Zamul Lachina, but also Shah Nischayvu Sunim Shah Yisrael Kliya. Jewish nation was chayiv destruction. Shach nifalo lagrifas. Al ki yoshev al mishpat imafach miyash yamos shenemar osugum neyesh. Person doesn't have to be afraid of anyone. The fact that Chachamim were afraid of lagrifas and they're mechanefim, the whole generation was chayiv misa. So Zakt Rabbeinu Yonah, I see from this Gemara that there's a chayiv to give up your life, not to be over on Chanifa. The Rabbeinu Yonah is really saying the Isser of Chanifa is Yahar Val Yaver. I frecked the Inshir audience. I never heard this before, Rabbi. This is Rabbeinu Yonah halachically. Rabbeinu Yonah is saying you're chayiv to give up your life, not to do the Isser Chanifa. Ask the guys, what do you mean? I thought there were 3 Averis Yahar Val Yavar. Avodah Zarah, Gil Rayas, and Shvikas Damin. Idolatry, immorality, and killing people. Where do you see over here that flattery is Yahar Val Yavar? So I saw a lot of Mepharshim struggle with this kasha. It's not just you guys ask the kasha. Very good kasha. I saw a lot of Mepharshim. Yes. Tzvi. Interesting. So some want to suggest maybe this is part of Avodah Zarah, that you're going to culture, Goyish culture. So yeah, there are lots of people that rant that Goyish culture is Avodah Zarah. But halachically, not so pashut, right? You're not worshiping Avodah Zarah when you go to a Dolphins game. Pashut shot, right? They, people are bombastic sometimes when they're kanais about certain things. But halachically speaking, l'chara, I wouldn't call this Avodah Zarah, right? How could this be? If you flatter, if you stand up for a position which is against the Torah, why is something like that Yahar Val Yavar? Why would you be chayiv to give up your life for it? Where's Rabbeinu Yonah get this from? Right, so we're saying like this: to support abortion is Yahar Val Yavar. Okay, so you've been reading all those billboards when you go back and forth from Orlando to Miami, right? I spent most of my time in New York. I never saw billboards like that. But when you drive between Orlando and Miami, all the time you do see that there are many right-to-life billboards all across Florida. I'm not sure it's the Bible Belt, but you definitely see a lot of pro-life billboards. Very strong ones, I might add. But where do we see from a halachic perspective that's Yahar Val Yavar? So I saw some Mepharshim explain this Rabbeinu Yonah. Oh, I guess one more potential pshat. I did see some people, it's actually based on the earlier Sefer. There's a Sefer Yad Ketana on the Rambam, pretty early Sefer, where he makes a chiluk by Hanifa between Safik Sakanas Tefashos and Vade Sakanas Tefashos. Vade Sakanas Tefashos, you would be allowed to be mechanef. But Safik Sakanas Tefashos, if it's only a Safik that you might get killed by the mafia, then you could be mechanef. Excuse me, then you can't. The only time, and they try to spin that shita into Rabbeinu Yonah. Rabbeinu Yonah means over here is you're chayiv to give up your life for a case of Safik Sakanas Tefashos. But if the guy is clear and present danger, the person is going to kill you, then you would not be allowed to do that. Kiva?
Don't we learn that Safik is the same day as Vade?
Oh, so you have to be right. When it comes to Hilchos Shabbos, Safik Pekuah Nefesh is the same day as that. So really people even challenge, the whole concept that's Yahar Val Yavar here is really kasha not just on the Vade level, even on the Safik level. You're right, it's very good kasha. I believe the Birchas Avram, there's a Birchas Avram, the Sefer on Gemara, many Masechtas, also has a Sefer on Shari Tshuva. There's a parish on Shari. So we answer kasha from Hilchos Shabbos. Very good. But on the Daiti, such a pshat, even though I saw chashuva people try to say this, about this, Solomon puts that into his pshat in Rabbeinu Yonah here. But L'maisa, the lashon is not really so with that. Chayiv Adam Limsar Atzmo Sakana is mashma, not just Safik Sakana. It's mashma even Vade Sakana. Simple lashon of Rabbeinu Yonah. So the best way I saw to explain this Rabbeinu Yonah is with the concept of Chil Hashem. That the reason why Rabbeinu Yonah over here is writing that person has to give up their lives not to be over in Hanifa is because that would be a Chil Hashem. And really, a fourth category of things which is Yahar Val Yavar is not just the Gimel Averos Chamuros, but also something which would be categorized, check out the Rambam, as a major Chil Hashem. And a firm Jew supporting a political, first let's do the Agrifas case, but something. Here you have Agrifas HaMelech, who clearly is someone that's not really fit to be king. He himself is acknowledging that. He's crying over that. And for the Chachamim to not just, for the Chachamim to come and say, Achinu Ata, which is not fully true, you're not fully our brother, in terms of the din of a melech. That's Chanifa. And that's a Chil Hashem. You're profaning Hashem's name. And a Chil Hashem, something like that, Yechayiv Limsar Atzma. That, I believe, is the best way to understand this Rabbeinu. So it comes out, L'kul Yalma, there's an Isser D'Oraisa of Chanifa. Seemingly, that Isser of Chanifa does apply in the realm of politics. Sammy, if you become a politician one day, we'll sit down before and we'll talk about it. Not so simple. Potentially, there are minefields or halachic hurdles of Isser Chanifa anytime you are involved in a situation where you're supporting something which is against the Torah. There's a machlokas rishonim, it seems, between Tosos, the Yereim on one side, and Rabbeinu on the other. Is a person chayiv to fight for this, even to the extent of giving up your life? That's the shaila, that's the, I believe, the background here in halacha. So practically, what would one say about such a case? So I have a few psakim. I found David Lichtenstein has this popular show, he's written a couple of books about it, the Headlines Torah Program. And he had a discussion about the Kim Davis case, where he brought in Rav David Cohen, the Rav from Flatbush, very chashuv posek, and Rav David Cohen paskined that Kim Davis, or any Jewish person in her shoes, if you're a clerk, if you work for the government, and you're signing on a document of a civil union protecting and granting marriage rights to same-gender people, you would be mechayiv to give up your job, fight to the finish, not to do it. And what did Rav David Cohen base it on? This Rabbeinu Yonah. He says, Rabbeinu Yonah says, you have to give up your life. Kol shekain, you have to give up your livelihood. Chayiv b'chol nafshecha, kol shekain, chayiv b'chol maldecha. And Rav David Cohen paskined, what Kim Davis did is obviously a tremendous kiddush Hashem, but that's the responsibility of every Jew in politics. They would have to give up everything they have to stand up for a position and not to be mechanef for something like that. Azayz up to David Cohen. The Maisa, upon further review in this topic, I found the Chavetz Chaim has what to say too. If you first look, the Chavetz Chaim in the Mishnah Berurah, in Siman Kuf Nun Vav. There in Kuf Nun Vav, the Chavetz Chaim has a very long Mishnah Berurah where he talks about all different mitzvos, some might call midos, which are not covered in many other areas of Shulchan Aruch. It's a very interesting siman and Mishnah Berurah in particular to do. So in Kuf Nun Vav Dalad, look what the Chavetz Chaim writes. Isa Bisota, so Parak Vav, Parak Zayin, Bishasha Koreh, Agrifas HaMelech, Osuchel Osis Alecha Ish Nachri, Zogel of Dimos, Sholem Ezer Yisrael. Right, Agrifas cried, Amra Achina Ata, V'osashan, Nischayivu, Yisrael Kliya, Jewish nation was Chayiv, destruction, Al Shachnifu Agrifas. In fact, they flattered Agrifas. Now look what the Chavetz Chaim writes. The Aval Pish Lo B'Yad Limchos. Chavetz Chaim acknowledges, they couldn't protest about him being king. They didn't have the power to do it. They couldn't stop him from being king. They shouldn't have spoken up and supported what he did. You're just concerned about the guy in front of you and not worried about the fear of God. Umiyu, if you're afraid they're going to kill you, if it's a life and death issue, you could say you did good, even if the person did an avera. So the Chavetz Chaim is paskening here in the Mishnah Berurah, like Tosas Shita, to be mekel. And if it's an issue of sakana, you're allowed to do it. However, I found the Chavetz Chaim in his namesake sefer, in the beginning, the psicha, the lavin, a person intentionally is over when he speaks Lashon Hara. The 16th lav is the Isser of Chanifa. And look what he writes in there. He's talking about the Etzem lav of Chanifa. He writes, very dangerous thing. You should be careful about it. Chayiv adam limser atzmo sakana, val yisar es nafsho avan Hashem kazeh. Person has to be very careful about such an avera and give himself to sakana. And the Bir Mayim Chaim, the Chavetz Chaim quotes his sources. He quotes the source for this, Rabbeinu Yonah. The Chara Bosa Yestira. Chavetz Chaim in Mishnah Berurah passes like Tosos to be mekel. Chavetz Chaim in Sefer Chavetz Chaim paskins like Rabbeinu Yonah to be machmer. Then I found many editions of Sefer Chavetz Chaim today don't even have this. It seems when the Chavetz Chaim printed the Sefer, I don't know, the first printing or the later printing, he added in hashmatos, additions in the back of the Sefer. You know the old time printing things, you find like the last page, they add in things. So it's very hard to find, so I found it. Look what he writes. He writes, Lashon Rabbeinu Yonah, that's the Lashon Rabbeinu Yonah, B'shai Tshuva. V'ayin B'sota, Tosos Dibo D'Chola Mineged Zeh. Tosos is against Rabbeinu Yonah. Then he quotes the Sefer Menorah Samar, which he says has a steer about this. So the Chavetz Chaim himself looks like he's changing and bringing in Tosos. It's a little strange because what are you going to tell me? The Chavetz Chaim discovered Tosos later in life? You didn't know that Tosos at the time? For the record, if you look at that Bir Mayim Chaim, which I quoted you, when he wrote the Lavim, look what he wrote. The Ayin B'Sota B'Tosos. He quoted that Tosos already in the Bir Mayim Chaim.
Did you write the Chavetz Chaim first? Or?
I believe he wrote the Chavetz Chaim, he did right before the Mishnah Berurah.
Okay.
But what's he adding the Hashmatos? He knew Tosos when he wrote the Chavetz Chaim and said Yechayev Lim Sar Satzma. So I believe the Pashtas very clearly what the Chavetz Chaim is doing is the following. Originally, when he wrote the Sefer Chavetz Chaim, he decided to paskin l'hachmer based on Rabbeinu Yonah. He brought Tosos in his footnotes in the Bir Mayim Chaim as another shita. Later in life, the Chavetz Chaim decided, you know what? It's not the correct psak. I'm going to put inside the text of the Sefer Chavetz Chaim, not just the Bir Mayim Chaim. In text, I want to quote Tosos Shita, and thus he also in the Mishnah Berurah Lahalacha quotes Tosos Shita. So seemingly, what it appeared to me, based on the Chavetz Chaim, seems to me clear based on his conclusion, he would not necessarily agree with Reb David Cohen's psak that there's a chiv limsar atzmo sakana makom chanifa. Chavetz Chaim says where it's really a shaila of sakana, then there is a strong tzad, the Chavetz Chaim is saying. He's writing that beferish in the Mishnah Berurah, that one could be mekel. So, I'm not sure. My father-in-law told me of a Maisa. I remember this from years ago. I called him up for the details again. Someone came to him with a shaila that he wanted to run for mayor in a Long Island town. So my father-in-law wasn't sure what to tell him. So my father-in-law first called up Aguda. And he spoke to Rabbi Tzvi Bell. He figured Aguda, you get these shailas all along. You have representatives that are in touch with Aguda all the time about politics. So Tzvi Bell said a very interesting chiluk. He said most of the time our representatives, we're talking about the state assembly, the city council, different things, but they're not the executive actively signing off on the law. They're voting on the law, not signing off on the law. That's an easier step to do than to be the executive who signs the law, the clerk whose name is on that thing, on that marriage license. So my father forgot which. So Aguda himself wasn't sure. They sent the shayla to the moetzas. My father remembers one of the moetzas calling back and saying Taka, he did feel that it was a problem to be the mayor and to sign off on certain laws, which would be Keneged the Torah. I'll tell you one other story. I found Mishpacha magazine did a profile in their Sukkot edition on this Rabbi Yechiel Kalish, who served in this for a time as a state representative in Illinois recently, and an abortion bill came up, and he had a pretty major situation where he took the position. Someone retired midterm, and he basically got the position, and he made an agreement with the person who was retiring that he would vote the way that Rabbi Kalish said. I'll vote the same way you would vote. He said it was a mistake because he didn't foresee all the potential consequences. So when it came up to the abortion bill, so Rabbi Kalish discussed it with, he says he did every move discussing with Gedolim, and he voted present. Present means you're not voting for the bill, but you're not voting against the bill, but you're voting present that the bill could continue to be voted on. And you're allowing it to go through. Really, they need his present vote for anything, but there was a big uproar. He ended up losing the next election because everyone attacked him for being anti-choice. Meanwhile, some people in the Frum community attacked him for not supporting it. Then if you look at the Lashon of the Mishabura writes, by the Alpha Pishol Hayu B'Yadam Limchos Makom Makom Hayalam Nishtog L'Hachzik. Mishabura himself is mashma. There might be a level of where you may not be able to object, but you should have kept quiet. Perhaps voting present is a means of keeping quiet in between. But I would just end off with really a topic I started with, the importance of Das Torah. Das Torah is not just something important for helping us, common folk, in our decision on who to vote for, not just a personal decision, it's really a communal decision. But it's important advice for someone in politics. I saw a story of this Rabbi Kalish was very close to Rabbi Avram Chaim Levin, Zatzal, Chashav Rosh Yeshiva of the Telz Yeshiva. Tremendous Adam Gadol. And I believe the advice that he gave Rabbi Kalish is really the ultimate advice for any Jew serving in politics. Rabbi Levin wrote, he says, your job as a Jew, a frum Jew, in political office is you have to be a good soldier. A good soldier, you have to be disciplined and always make sure to do what's right. If a person keeps the attitude in politics that I'm here to really represent the people that voted me in, especially those people, the Jewish people, the Am HaNivchar, we have to be so careful in politics when it comes to making a Kiddush Hashem, and a Chas V'Shalom not to make a Chil Hashem. The job of every politician is to be just that, a good soldier, to do the Ratzon Hashem and represent Hashem's people to the world. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Hopefully, all of our tefillos on tomorrow's Yom Tefillah should be answered, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who alone is Mamlech Malachim, should choose for the Jewish people in the world the best leader that will take us into a time of Shalom, with the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu, the Meir of Yemeinu.
Amen.
We should have off like it's true.
That sounds like a nice
Is it off because it's awkward?
It's not all for seconds. It's not to go outside for 5 minutes.
I don't. Wait. I think
So, this is
after find a way.
that is a lot of time.
Grandma.